In this video, I'm going to rank every single thermal item in Fortnite history from worst to best. These are all weapons and items that are united by their ability to give you thermal vision. I've got two honorable mentions here. One to the thermal imploder from Galactic Battle, right? Don't be fooled by its name. It does not give you thermal vision. And as well to the anvil launcher, right? While it looks like thermal vision, it is not, and it is simply just a tracking scope. If you do go on to enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like. Use code TYFRYZ in the Fortnite item shop when you get the chance, and let's get right into this ranking video. At my number 11 spot, dead last, it's actually not a weapon, it's an augment. It's the thermal mud augment, which will give you thermal vision when you are covered in mud. Yeah, so I don't really think this needs much of an explanation as to why it's in last place. Who cares, right? Like genuinely, who cares about this augment? There are so many better, more valuable augments than this one, right? I see what they're going for here, right? Is that the mud is in the jungle and thermal vision can be helpful when you are, well, in the jungle. But it's just like, this is another one of those augments that just feels like a complete waste of space. And it's just like, this is just never really going to be helpful, right? Like there's just so few opportunities when you're gonna be like, oh, I wish I had the thermal mud augment to save me here, right? This should be, no question about it, easy last place. And at number 10, would you look at that? Another augment, no surprise. It's the Primal Companion augment, again, from Chapter 4, Season 3, which would gain thermal vision to the player and regenerate health while riding animals. And the only reason why it's not in last place is because, well, when you have this augment, you can also regenerate health when riding animals. That can be helpful sometimes. But again, it's like, I'm not going to go out of my way to find a raptor, jump on its back just to get the thermal vision. Like, the thermal here is kind of like a bonus. If I'm using this augment, I'm using it because I desperately need heals, and there's an animal right next to me, right? So again, the thermal just kind of feels like an afterthought here, whereas like you probably rather just pop this if you're in, you know, end game and there's an animal right next to you and you desperately need white heals. But again, how many times does that happen? Almost never. Total flop of an augment, average addition to the game from Chapter 4 Season 3. Let's move on. On to number 9, and I've got the thermal fish, which is a legendary fish. Remember that, that's key, a legendary fish that only gives you 15 HP, but 20 seconds of thermal. Look, honestly, this item is not much better than the augments that I just named, but at least with the thermal fish, right, like you can kind of control when you want the thermal, and 20 seconds of thermal vision is pretty good. I'm trying to kind of find nice things to say about the thermal fish, but really at the end of the day, it's a legendary fish, meaning it's pretty difficult to catch. You only get 15 HP when you take it, and the only benefit here is that you get to pop the thermal whenever you want, unlike the thermal mud when there's, you know, a condition that has to be met for you to even be able to gain the thermal vision in the first place. But again, nothing crazy here with the thermal fish. And speaking of nothing crazy, at my number 8 spot is the thermal taffy, almost identical to the thermal fish, except it is a common rarity item, which you probably forgot even existed in the game. And while yes, this item only gives you 5 HP, it also gives you thermal for 30 whole seconds, right? Which is a third as much time as the thermal fish does. I value that extra 10 seconds of thermal over the, you know, plus 10 white heals that you get from using the thermal fish as opposed to the taffy. Again, as you guys can tell, I'm kind of, you know, blowing through these ones at the bottom here because there's nothing really interesting to say. There's not going to be any, you know, crazy entertaining gameplay on the screen. I obviously don't want to bore you guys to death, but now we are starting to get into the weapons, and this is where things are going to get interesting. So let's move on to the number 7 spot. At number 7 today is going to be the exotic version of the scoped revolver. That's the Nighthawk. And honestly, on most videos, the Nighthawk is pretty much at the bottom of the list, but here it is, a couple spots higher from the bottom. And this is a weapon that, right, like I genuinely just don't think needed a thermal scope. Like, why does this weapon have thermal on it, right? Like the regular scoped revolver is perfectly fine. It's not like this weapon, you know, functions any differently from the regular scoped revolver. It functions identically and just has the damage of a legendary scoped revolver. And honestly, if you don't like thermal vision, I could totally see you just taking a legendary scoped revolver over the Nighthawk. Again, this is another kind of item on this list where the thermal doesn't feel like, you know, the main cool thing about this weapon. It just kind of feels like an afterthought where they were just like, all right, how can we come up with a weird version of the scoped revolver that is not really going to change anything about how the weapon functions? Oh, let's just give it thermal vision. That's fine. And I feel like it's even more disappointing when you look at, you know, the other exotics, right? Look, the Boom Heavy Sniper is not good, but that thing shoots literal clinger grenades. The Marksman 6 shooter, which will do 4 times critical headshot damage. The Dragon's Breath shotgun, which shoots incendiary heavy bullets, right? Like, these are all exotics where their ability, their like extra added bonus, the reason why they are exotic, really fundamentally changes how you use the weapon, but with the Nighthawk, that doesn't change with the thermal vision, and overall, it's just a pretty mid weapon. At number 6 is going to be the old version of the thermal scoped AR, right? So the new version introduced in Chapter 3, that will be its own spot because they are just totally different weapons. And the old thermal scoped AR added in the beginning of Chapter 1 around that Season 3 to Season 4 mark is still pretty bad, but what I will say is after playing a bunch of OG, I feel like I've come to have a little bit more of an appreciation for this weapon. Like, don't get me wrong, it's still not good. It's got horrible recoil. The thermal vision is what the old version of thermal used to look like, which is not as good as the new version looks like. It has one of the slowest fire rates for any assault rifle in Fortnite history, but it genuinely hits like a truck, right? The amount of times that I've got dinged for a 72 headshot with a scoped assault rifle in OG is kind of insane, right? Like, the fact that this thing can just double dink you for 140 is really, really nutty. And honestly, I find that, you know, if you don't have a sniper, like, a lot of people will take this instead of their sniper spot in their inventory. This weapon can actually be really good depending on how you like to play the game, but for me, right, like, this is not a weapon that I'm like, oh, I see it on the ground, I need to pick it up, I'm definitely going to take it into endgame with me. I'm taking a SCAR over it 10 out of 10 times. At my number 5 spot today, guys, this might be a surprise to some of you, it's going to be the Amban sniper rifle. Now, at one point, right, in Chapter 2, Season 5, when this was just the mythic version, it would be higher up on this list, but unfortunately, the new version of the Amban sniper has really just hurt my love for this weapon. The blue version doing 98 damage to the body in galactic battle is absolutely pitiful, right? Like, what other bolt action sniper in the blue rarity in Fortnite history is not one-shotting to the body? Like, that is absolutely atrocious that this thing is hitting for 98 damage. It's terrible. There's no other way to say it. And at the end of the day, just compare it to the regular bolt action sniper, right? The purple bolt action is doing 116 damage. That is more damage than the mythic Amban sniper rifle does, right? The purple version only does 103. So there's no excuse for the Amban sniper rifle to be doing this little amounts of damage. The weapon's really cool to use. It sounds amazing. It's really fun. But if you go watch any galactic battle gameplay, right, like, nobody is using this thing. And yeah, cool, like, you can melee with it. Nobody ever uses that. But yeah, unfortunately, the Amban sniper rifle has taken a big hit with the new versions that were added in galactic battle. And honestly, unfortunately. At number 4, though, guys, is going to be the new version of the thermal AR. Of course, this will include, you know, its mythic version. It was Huntmaster Saber's thermal scoped assault rifle. And I always feel like I have kind of a weird opinion on this weapon, right? Because I don't think it's ever going to be the best assault rifle in a season. And it definitely wasn't back in Chapter 3. But it is still entirely serviceable. And to me, just kind of feels like a precursor to what the thermal DMR would end up becoming. This change to the thermal scoped assault rifle was entirely needed, right? Like, it just totally changed what the old one did wrong, right? Super slow fire rate, really bad recoil. This one has like literally no recoil and a great fire rate, but at the cost of lower damage. But if you had to ask me, right, like 10 out of 10 times, I'm taking the new thermal scoped assault rifle over the old one, and that's absolutely not a hot take. I think 95% of the people watching this video will probably agree with me. And now we are inside our top 3, and at my number 3 spot as a weapon, I actually just mentioned it's the thermal DMR. This will include its mythic version, that is Diamond's thermal DMR. And yeah, honestly, like I just said, this weapon is kind of what the new thermal assault rifle kind of feels like it was meant to be. In a recent video where I looked at some of Fortnite's most underrated weapons, go check that video out if you haven't, that was a banger. Spoiler alert, I put the thermal DMR as the most underrated DMR, and yeah, I hold true to that statement. I think this thing is actually really, really good, and I am not a fan of DMRs, I never have been, but if I had to pick one where I'm like, yeah, I want that, I'm taking this one. Also, I think it's really crucial that you can actually turn on and off the thermal vision. So even if you really like how this weapon functions, but you just don't like the thermal scope, well, just take the thermal scope off of it. And speaking of taking thermal scopes off of weapons, I should have mentioned in the beginning, I can't believe I didn't mention it until now. Yeah, I'm not including the Chapter 5 weapons because, well, yeah, any of them could have a thermal scope on it, so there's no way I'm doing that. And there's no mythics that have the thermal scope on them in Chapter 5. But yeah, thermal DMR, completely serviceable weapon, and dare I say I'm a fan of a DMR. Maybe I am. At number 2 is going to be the Titan tank. Yes, the literal tank from Chapter 3 Season 2, because if you would remember back then, you could toggle on a thermal scope. Now, yeah, obviously, this thing is a literal tank. Like, I'm going from ranking thermal fish and thermal taffy to literal tanks, so obviously, like, the gap there is absolutely insane, and I was wondering if I should even include this on the list today, but if you go on the Fortnite wiki and you look up the thermal effect, yeah, the Titan tank will will be there, so I included it. Obviously, it is a literal tank, and you're probably sitting here like, how is this thing not at the number 1 spot today? Like, what could beat out a literal tank? And you know what? I know you guys are waiting for it, so let's just get right into it. At my number 1 spot today, guys, is going to be Midas's Gilded Eye Drum Gun from Chapter 6, Season 2. Yes, I would rather have Midas's Gilded Eye Drum Gun in my hand than be inside of the Titan tank. I don't know if that's like a crazy take, but Midas's Gilded Eye Drum Gun is literally a tank in and of itself. Like, the amount of damage, like consistent damage you can do with this weapon. By the way, you can toggle on or off the thermal scope. The one problem with the drum gun is that it had a ton of recoil. Well, this weapon doesn't feel like it has any recoil. Does a metric ton of damage, a ton of bullets, great fire rate as always. You can use it as an SMG, you can use it as an AR. Like, I was concerned when they were adding a thermal scoped version of a drum gun. I'm like, really? You're gonna put a thermal scope on an SMG? Yeah, I was totally wrong. Midas's Gilded Eye Drum Gun is literally one of the best mythic items we have ever seen. Like, that is not a ridiculous take. This is probably within the top 20 to 25 mythic weapons of all time. You guys gotta remember, we've got over like 150 mythics, so that's a great placement. And I know it sounds like the glaze is absolutely crazy here, but if you played in Chapter 6 Season 2, you'll know people were carrying this thing every single time they saw it, and so was I. Alright folks, that is every single thermal item in Fortnite history ranked from worst to best. Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of my ranking, if there's anything that you would change, what placements, and why. This video has been requested so many times. I'm telling you, I see all of your comments. I literally read every single one, so don't be afraid to leave me a comment down there in the comment section. If you did go on to enjoy this video, please consider leaving it a like, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. As always, peace.